So thank you all for being here for a really exciting February CTIPP CAN call. We're going to have a really great presentation between Jen and Minnie Whalen about successful meeting with a representative talking about, the successful side of advocacy. So really excited about that conversation. And then a really great presentation about work that's being done to incorporate trauma-informed care, working with in IDD settings, so intellectual and developmental disability settings. And so really looking forward to the CTIPP CAN call. Appreciate you all being here. Two things that I just want to touch on before we get started about some transitions here at CTIPP. So one is that for those who were on our January CTIPP CAN call, it was much more conversational and engaging with breakout rooms. And we just wanted to let folks know to be able to prepare and plan that is going to be more of the norm moving forward. Again, for this CTIPP CAN call, it'll be more webinar based, but we recognize that, when Dan started the CTIPP CAN calls back in 2019, there were not a lot of free resources talking about trauma-informed care and the implementation of practice that were being widely made available. Throughout the pandemic, there has been many groups doing these webinar formatted events with calls talking about how trauma-informed care is being implemented. What there is a lack of that we have seen is opportunity to process and engage and continue the conversation from more of a collective, from a position of collective and network building. And so we really want to move our community advocacy network, the CTIPP CAN, toward that sort of format. And so our director of trauma-informed practices and systems transformation, Whitney Maris, has been doing a lot of planning, and we are really excited to start rolling out more of that engagement sort of CTIPP CAN call, like what you saw last month, in the months ahead. And so just wanted to let folks know about that. And then the other update and transition is that our good friend and still Director of Government Affairs, Jen Kurt, has had an incredible opportunity to go back to the Hill and become a legislative director. So we are so thrilled for them, but also sad for us as we will unfortunately lose their expertise and wisdom guiding our government affairs work from within CTIPP. And so this is actually Jen's last day. And will be their last CTIPP CAN call, at least as a staff member of CTIPP. Don't be too surprised if we still engage with them moving forward, but would love to take a moment to just really talk about, how much, Jen, you've done to transform our gov affairs work. Our network, the wisdom that you've brought to us has just been incredible. And I see some love on the screen and in the chat. But don't be afraid to send them a message of love. Jen, you've done such great work over the last year for us, and we're so grateful for the time we've had with you on staff. So thank you. And with that, I will now turn it over to Jen in a somewhat awkward transition to do their presentation with Minnie and give some policy updates for us. So Jen, thank you again. And I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jesse. I appreciate everyone's really kind words. You will not lose whatever expertise I bring to the table. I will still be around. I will still be in touch. I'm just excited for the opportunity to go back and champion these issues on the inside, knowing that you all will continue to do this work in a partnership role from the outside. So I thank you all for welcoming me into this movement. It's been really a joy to learn from all of you and to play whatever small supporting role that I've been able to play in your journeys to make change in your communities and on the local, state, and federal level. So I will definitely still be around, but I think we're going to have a really great CTIPP CAN call today, and I'm excited that so many of you were able to make it. I'm going to spend a few minutes actually before Minnie and I move into our presentation just to give an update on what's happening in Congress and some opportunities that I think folks should be paying attention to. So about this time last year, when I was first coming to these CTIPP CAN calls, we talked about earmarks and community project funding, which is what earmarks are now called on the House side, and congressionally dedicated spending or directed spending on the Senate side. And at CTIPP, we were able to support several organizations in our network in applying for earmark funding. And we recently celebrated the Tennyson Center in Denver, Colorado, which was a organization that we helped apply for earmark funding. They did receive $1 million to build, and somebody from that organization may be on this call today, but to build out a new center that will focus on mental health supports for youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we're really excited to see the way that Tennyson Center worked with their representative, Diana DeGette, to get that funding. And I wanted to just bring that to everyone's attention again today, because that process will possibly start again soon. And so what we know is that Republicans have gained control of the House, but the conference has agreed that they want to keep the earmark process, so that they are likely to open up the process of earmarks again for fiscal year 2025 or 2024. And that will give everyone an opportunity once again to apply for federal spending. And I'll talk a little bit about in the next couple of minutes what that means and what that could look like. But they are going to come back this year with some changes. I know that because of the dynamics of Republicans taking control of the House, and they need to come up with a compromise between both parties to move the spending bills forward, Republicans are going to add some new requirements and some new restrictions, and we're waiting to see what those are. In terms of a timeline, the president is expected to come out with his proposed budget on March 9th, and then we can expect the House and the Senate Appropriations Committees to put forth their budget proposals shortly after that. And so we can expect the deadline for applying for this funding to come sometime in the spring. It happens really quickly. And I think my conversation today with Minnie, which we'll have in a moment, is really well timed, because if you are thinking about exploring whether this application for this funding might be right for you, developing a relationship now with your representative in Congress is really important, so that when that ask comes along, they know who you are and they are familiar with the work that you're doing in their district or in their state. I'm just going to talk briefly about what are earmarks and what you can kind of expect. But I'm going to put in the chat a guidance document that I put together last year, which is several pages long. It will need to be refreshed this year with the new guidelines. But this is something that I would look at to determine if perhaps this is something that could be useful to the work that you are doing or your organization. What happens is that the Appropriations Committee opens certain accounts and makes certain accounts available for requests for funding. So for example, they made in the Department of Health and Human Services, the Health Resources Services account, the HRSA account, which allowed for requests for funding for new construction related to any kind of healthcare services or new capital equipment purchases. So a new X-ray machine, right? A new MRI machine, things like this. So they have accounts, specific accounts with specific eligibility criteria in many different sectors: transportation, housing, violence prevention, all kinds of things. And so what you would want to do to explore whether this might be a good opportunity for you is to look through the accounts, and they may be similar to what happened last year, or they may be slightly different. And just to see if you might have a project that could be eligible for funding. And what I would say about earmarks is, unlike applying for other federal grants, the application process and the kind of information you need to provide is a lot less. There's just a lot less that you have to do to submit for an earmark. And so it makes it a little bit more easy for smaller organizations to apply. And you can receive anywhere from $100,000 to a few $1,000,000 that we've seen. And so I just would hope that you take a look, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the time that I have left, but I know that the organization can answer additional questions. But I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this funding is coming, and this opportunity is likely coming for you to apply. Then again, there's no guarantee that they are going to pass a new omnibus this year, which would require the House and the Senate to agree on a spending package and then pass that. It's possible they'll just continue the same funding levels as last year through what's called a CR, continuing resolution, which means that these community projects probably would not be able to ride through. So keep that in mind. I didn't want to go too in depth here with information, so I think I'll just leave it at that. Let folks take a look through the documents. And then if you do have additional questions or want additional guidance, please do reach out. And then that brings us to the next piece of the presentation. Over the last couple months at CTIPP CAN, we have been able to do some breakout rooms to get in touch with all of you and get a sense of what your advocacy goals are. What would be helpful from CTIPP to help you accomplish those goals, both on the state, local, and federal level, knowing that our specialty is federal advocacy. One of the things that came up in a lot of the conversations that I had and some of the readouts from the other breakout rooms was that folks felt like they would love to create a relationship with their Congress member or senator, but feel perhaps kind of intimidated about how do I do that? Am I qualified to talk about this? What kind of questions would they ask me? What would I need to know? What are my talking points? Why would I need to reach out? So just a number of questions. And what we want to do is start to break down some of those barriers and answer some of those questions so that folks can feel better equipped to do that kind of work. And explain a little bit what to expect. And we don't want to necessarily do that with only just sending out documents. We want to really present that on these calls in a really accessible way and allow folks to ask questions. And so I'm going to invite Minnie onto the virtual stage with me for a conversation about her recent experience starting a relationship with her representative. And then I want folks to be thinking about any questions that you have as you're imagining what it would look like for you to create a relationship, either a relationship because you want potential support for the work that you're doing, or that you want to be able to advocate for them to do more, on policy issues. Think about what questions that remain for you, what are outstanding in terms of the barriers to you actually taking that step to do this. So Minnie and I connected, I think a couple months ago, and Minnie Whalen is from the Clallam, am I pronouncing that right? Clallam Resilience Project in the United Way of Clallam County, which I'll let her speak a little bit more about what exactly they do in Washington State. But Minnie reached out to me and said to me, hey, I just got connected with Representative Kilmer's office. He's the congressman for Washington's 6th Congressional District. What do I do? Do I ask for a meeting? If I ask for a meeting, what do I say? What can I expect? And so we had a great conversation where we sort of walked through, what you can do to prepare, what you can expect. And I wanted to invite Minnie today to share her experience, her personal testimony of what it was like, what happened, and advice for other folks. And so Minnie, I'll just open up for you to just, if you want to first explain a little bit about what you all do, and then what started the relationship between you and Congressman Kilmer's staff.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jesse. And hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm really a little nervous and very honored. I'm Minnie Whalen. I'm with the Clallam Resilience Project, which operates out of the United Way of Clallam County. So if this is Washington State, we are on the Olympic Peninsula here. So we're pretty like geographically isolated. We're the most Pacific Northwest on the continental United States, and are pretty rural. And our vision is a more resilient Clallam County, individuals, organizations, systems, and our community. And we do that through a number of different ways. And I've been a fan and a follower of CTIPP for a couple of years now, have participated in a couple of these calls, never as an active speaker, always as a observer and a learner. And so I was inspired a few months ago to join in the advocacy campaign and try to reach out to Representative Kilmer, who is from locally our area, and to highlight some of the good work that's being done. And then also to say that we're potentially looking into what this earmark looks like and if it's a viable option for us. And so I did a cold outreach, and I just looked up on on the website, and then did a contact me and said, can you tell me more about this earmark funding, and I'm interested in learning more. And so I'd received an email back from them, and then that's when I reached out to Jen and said, okay, now what do I do? And so Jen had advised me to then say that here's some of the ways that I can approach this depending on what we're looking for. Jen, do you want to speak more about our conversation?
Yes, and a little bit of additional background. So taking it back more than a year ago now, when the American Rescue Plan Act was passed and all that money went out to states to spend, CTIPP put out guidance on how do you try and get access to some of that American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA funding to use it for your work. And what Minnie and her organization did was use that guidance and do exactly that. And they did receive some of that ARPA funding. So that's really important context too about the relationship between her organization and the congressman, because he voted yes to pass the American Rescue Plan Act. So he played a role in making sure they got some of that funding. So there's some good history there. Just to break it down a little bit, what caused you, we can get into the conversation we have, but what caused you to reach out to me in terms of both the logistics, but also how you were feeling about what might come next?
You know, after having listened to you, I realized that you're really an expert in how to navigate some of these systems and even the way of thinking about it, and to break it down for someone like me who is humbled by the process and doesn't feel like an expert in this. And so I sought out you for some guidance about, okay, what are some of the ways that I can approach thinking about these conversations or about exploring these viabilities for our work. And then also, you know, I was questioning about what actually is happening in DC around this. Are they already involved with you? How much do they know about this? How much can I assume that they know about this? And then I also wanted to support the good work that CTIPP's doing, and whether that is highlighting their relationship that's already existing or introducing them to your work. So I was hoping to do all those things potentially in a conversation or an email thread.
And I'm so glad that you did reach out. A lot of people think that in order to start this relationship with their representative, they need to be able to speak in depth about all of these various policy issues, bills that are moving, current events, or have an ask at all. And so I think what was great about our conversation was really breaking down what qualifies someone to speak with their representative and what the representative wants to hear from you and what would be helpful to them. Because the answer is, I think elected officials kind of struggle to keep tabs on everything that's happening within their constituency. And they also struggle to get the word out about the work they are doing. And so you don't have to be an expert or even versed at all in policy to have a valuable relationship with them. They want to know what's happening in the district. Who can we support? Who likes our work? Who wants us to do something differently? And how can I work with this organization to be able to spread the message about what I'm doing in Washington, D.C. And so when I spoke with you, I immediately thought, wow, they're going to love this conversation, right? They are going to be really excited to hear that the votes that he's been taking and the work that he's been doing has already helped you. And for you to explain exactly why that is, exactly how you are able to use that funding. So when he goes out and advocates for more of it, or defends his vote on it, he can explain exactly the benefits to his community. So I think part of it is just keeping them informed of how people are feeling, what's going on, what's the impact of this spending, or any kind of votes that he's taking or work that he's done. I also remember we talked about the fact that a lot of staff don't have a foundational knowledge of trauma. And we can't really go into these meetings assuming that they're going to understand what we mean by trauma, what we mean by resilience, what we mean by, trauma-informed policy, or, neuroscience or ACEs or anything like that. And so I enjoyed our conversation where we talked about, how do you start with the fundamentals and like some basic information and facts to get them up to speed. I mean, I won't cut to the chase about like how it actually went in your meeting, but sometimes they're really going to get it. And sometimes you're going to need to bring them up to speed a little bit. And it's about figuring out, how much information is the right amount of information. And CTIPP is going to come out with like additional talking points to help you sort of work through what that balance is, to make sure that you're all sort of talking about the same thing. And what else can I say about our conversation? One of the things I always emphasize, one of the guiding principles that I want to sort of share with people outside of the Hill, is that it's really a give and take relationship. And you always want to give more than you take. You always want to offer more than you ask. And so an ask is, can I have some of your time? Can I meet with you? And so what are you going to give them? And there are a number of things that you can give. And one is, and so we talked about like some of the great things that you have to offer. And I wanted to make sure that you explain to their office everyone that you're connected with in the community. So all of the other stakeholders that you do work with. And so one of the benefits that they can understand from that is, oh, if I work with this organization, they're going to help me get the word out about the great work that the congressman is doing, or they're going to help me solicit input from the community about the work that they've been doing. And so that's one thing that you can offer. You can also offer facts and information, educational. But what I would caution against, which we can do, but it just, I think to create a rich relationship, you want to be able to be offering, but to go in and only to ask for the time, and then to go in and only continue to ask, can you do this? Yes or no? Will you do that? Yes or no? It's less of a relationship and more of like a kind of a one-off transactional meeting. And so we talked a little bit about that. And how did you feel going into the meeting? What did you do to prepare? And how do you feel like it went?
Well, Jen, I think your tutelage really helped me feel more confident. And I loved the way that you helped me reframe it, right? From precisely what you're saying, that it's not me asking for their time and me providing them more information, but really me telling a story for them about what's happening in their district and their successes, and thanking them for their service and their leadership, and showing how that, what that looks like on the ground level. And it was, to me, that felt like a much more authentic way of developing a relationship too. And So I created some slides to be able to tell that story of how our ARPA funds looked on the ground, and to then continuously say, here's what it looks like with our community partners as well. And I think that was really valued. In preparing for this conversation with you, I went back and I looked at some of the emails that were between me and the staffers, Team Kilmer, and that they were excited about our school district partners, and they were excited about our health clinic partners. And I could see them on the Zoom sort of looking forward and looking at the details of who actually were partnering with us. And so they were really paying attention to what our work looked like. Luckily for us, the staffer who I met with had a background in neuroscience and was very familiar with adverse childhood experiences and the way that the brain works. And so I think it had, I didn't have to go into as much background into some of the talking points about trauma-sensitive care and the impact of awareness around trauma and public health effects. So it was, the work then was really highlighted on this is what it looks like for our entity in your district. And I think that they were excited to make those local connections. Another thing that your tutelage really helped me with was to then have an invite at the end of the presentation. Our goal, which you had recommended, is to ask for a half an hour meeting and to make it 20 minutes so that they have extra time within that to either end the meeting and do other things or to continue with the conversation. And so that was, I think, appreciated by the person that I was presenting to. And then the last couple slides were invitations for them to either do a site visit or to join one of our Zoom meetings so that we could publicly recognize and honor the work that they're doing and the ARPA funds that they have granted to us. And so again, it was the reframing of not please come join us, but let us share the good work that you're doing and celebrate that. And so that reframing, I think, made a real difference in the tone of the conversation. And I think they were really excited then to introduce me to their district director, their outreach point of contact in our county, and then also our federal grants manager. And so all that was done after the meeting so that they could learn more about the work that we're doing as well.
That's awesome. I'm so glad it went well and that you felt prepared and that they then opened up all these resources and connections to you. It was sort of a gateway into more resources for you all. And that's an important point, is like these conversations are not, you know, always just a conversation. Like sometimes they can really open doors for new opportunities. And I think that is important because when you talk, I mean, each office has a district staff or a state staff and a DC staff. So the DC staff are going to work on federal policy, but the people in the district are working on casework, helping you contact the IRS or the VA or, you know, access your Social Security, and then people that are just making sure they know what's going on in the community. And so sometimes you'll get a chance to meet with the legislative staff and they'll understand the policy side of this, what kind of things we need to advocate for, what we want to fight for. And then the district staff is just helping manage those relationships and plan those kinds of events and things like that. And so it makes sense that she sort of moved you saying into the district relationship, saying, you know, I kind of get what you need in the legislative side, like now, you know, let's connect you with the district so they can manage this relationship. Briefly, and then we can take some questions. Where do we go from here? What do you think is next?
Well, I think one of the things that that really surprised me was just how receptive and responsive that they were. I was getting email responses within 24 hours of me contacting them. And that they said, here, how can I help? And they said, let me know if you want letters of support. Let me know if you need help assisting the navigation of federal grant process and the opportunities that fit in with your goals. And so they left a lot of open doors and windows for us to pursue. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do. I think a lot of it depends on what you had said before, and thinking about what would be helpful for us. And so we don't have any immediate plans, but it's really nice that we've set that groundwork so that we can potentially make connections with them later on. And then I also think that we sent them some of your work that you're doing with CTIPP and said, you know, be on the lookout for the work here. And if there's a way that you want to partner, you can look for that too.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And to recap and break down some of the things you said, representatives, when you apply for federal funding, can send a letter of support on your behalf. So that complements your application, and they'll send it to the agency or they'll send it to you so that you can use it with the agency, just give you a little bit of that push when it comes to making sure they review your application and understand that this is a project that has support from your representative. So that is something that they offered back to you as a resource. I also think like it makes total sense to not know what's next. I think creating this relationship before you even have an ask, right? Proactively making sure you have this connection so that when you do want something, you already know who to talk to, they know who you are, and they have that existing relationship so they can understand in their political calculus, okay, like working with this group is not taking on risk, right? Like we trust them, we know they're doing good work. So doing this now before you have a reason to, I think it makes total sense. And then finally, we really appreciate that you like knowing that you had this meeting so that if we need something from him because of a committee that he's on or a bill he's working on, we know that you have that relationship and we can reach out and say, hey, I know you have this relationship. We love working with Minnie. Here's some of our policy asks going into the appropriation season. So the fact that you could plug CTIPP and let us know that you have that relationship so that we can, you know, leverage that relationship on when we have specific lobbying that we want to do. So we have a few minutes before we need to go to the next piece in our agenda. Does anyone have questions for Minnie?
Jeffrey, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I've had a fair amount of experience doing this, and I would add a couple of bits of information. It's always easy to curry favor with the local staff, number one. The last time I tried to do this, I found out that the local staff person had just graduated college and was really rather ignorant about the issue I was talking about. So I spent a lot of time giving her background and then invited her to contact me if the issue came alive. Without, you know, really having an ask or anything like that. And then you can call that person back and say, hey, this has come up. How would you like me to approach the congressman about this? The second observation I would make is there are always people calling about mundane things or not programmatic policy. And I think that congressional staff at the local level gets really excited when someone comes in not seeking to serve their family or themselves, but to talk about overall policy issues. And that gives you a leg up by having broad concerns on your mind. And then as a constituent, you can always on the website make an appointment to see the congressperson. And even if you just want to blow off steam or talk about your family, that's a good start, because when issues come up, then you can always say, you may not remember this, but we had a good chat 6 months ago. Gives you a foundation to go in and exert some leverage. But remember, most of the leverage they get is from lobbyists and professional organizations. So they're really pleased as punch to have input from local people who are interested in policy and program.
Is there a question, Jeffrey? Or
No.
do you just want to offer that background on your experience?
That's my experience.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think sometimes it can be surprising to people to see that the staff are quite young, but there's always a reason why they were hired, and we have to treat everyone with respect. They are experts either, because of what they studied or just their own lived experience. And these staff cover 6 different policy issues. They've got to be an expert in something, even if it's not the issue I came in to talk about today. So even if they're young, they deserve our praise for being public servants. And so, but thank you for sharing your experience with everyone. I
have a statement.
Okay. We have Judge Lynn Tepper with a hand up, and then I'll call on you, Chaplain James.
James can go before me. It's okay.
Okay, James.
Thank you, Judge.
You bet.
Okay, Minnie, you sound like a person that is a future conversation for me, and I like what you're doing, and I see what you're doing will be needed in my future. So I want to introduce myself to you and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
I'm finished.
Jen, I wanted to go deeper with what Jeffrey was saying, and that is the local. From my experience when I was in Florida and dealing with our congressional representative on behalf of 0 to 3, I discovered that the staffers have stories and they have connections. Of course, I was in a position where they would want to come to lunch with me and bring the congressman along, but you would learn key things about their background so you could figure out when an issue came up who was best to contact. It was fabulous information for me to know that one of the staffer's sisters had adopted a child who had lived in an abusive household and now had experienced all of the adverse childhood experiences, and now we're adopting a younger one and could see the contrast when the child hadn't been exposed long-term to adversity in their childhood. But I wouldn't know that unless I'd had an engaged conversation. Then I knew who to email when I needed to on certain issues and how to approach it. So it's not always easy to get to know the staff, but to the extent that you can, it may give you a better path forward.
That's such a wise contribution, and I will build upon that to say, even if the staff don't share their personal connection to what you're talking about, we can't assume that they don't have a story of their own. Maybe they don't want to come out and explain why this resonates with them, but it's important not to show up to a meeting and say things that could be triggering or assume that they don't have a traumatic story of their own that they relate to and that they might find this content heavy. We want to just make this very friendly and accessible and informative. So thank you for that. I think we have one more question from Whitney, and then I'll pass it back over to Jesse.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, Minnie, I am so glad you're here. And I just have to say, I'm so struck by how resourceful you've been in tapping others' expertise to really build your own wisdom, right? Half of the battle sometimes is knowing our resources and having the courage to tap into those resources. And I really appreciated earlier when you articulated some of those thoughtful questions that you asked to really fill those gaps that you noticed. What do people even really need to know? And so it's really amazing to hear about how you've built relationships and momentum locally and more broadly. And on that note, I'm really curious to know, what has become clearer to you over time as being really important in the way of skills or strengths that you found yourself really leaning on to help you be as successful as you've been?
Thanks, Whitney. What a kind comment and question. I think one of the things that really came to play with this work is just how important it is to do it collectively. And so whether it's in a team in a group like this, or a team locally, or reaching out to ask for help with things that I don't know how to do, or bringing another person with me to the meeting who has a different voice and perspective, all of those seem to me like ways that it can strengthen the conversations and be more inclusive for our work. And I found that, you know, whether it's the advice of CTIPP to say, let's figure out coalitions of coalitions, who's doing this work locally, or whether it's being able to look at the newsletters that say, here's how we're informing people in our legislation, that those bits and pieces that sort of spark to me, and the people, I think, who also spark to me, and really just trying to be brave and saying, here's what I do know and here's what I don't know. Can we work together? Can I learn more? And that people are usually really helpful and responsive, like Jeffrey and Judge Lynn Temper, to say, here's what we do know, and here's been my experience, and here's how I've done this before. And I think just Jen and saying, here's she was so, I'm sorry, they were so receptive in saying, here's my guidance. I'll look at your PowerPoint. I'll get back to you quickly. Here's the background on the person who you're speaking to. All of that gave me such confidence and feeling like I wasn't doing it alone.
Minnie, thank you so much. Jen, please.
No, I was just going to say thank you so much, Minnie, and thanks everyone for their questions, and pass it back over to you, Jesse.
Yeah, what an awesome way to start the CTIPP CAN call. And again, so much more of that network building to come. We're really, really, really excited to continue to build that strong network, so that way no one feels alone in these advocacy processes as best as possible as we continue to build the movement. We next have a quick 3 to 5 minute presentation from a wonderful colleague of mine named Krista Goldstein Cole. I serve for CTIPP as the executive director on loan from ANS Research. And I have gotten to work with Krista over the last two and a half years or so. And Krista has been working for a large part on that, on a really exciting research project that would be wonderful if we can have our network participate in. And so Krista, hopefully that was a decent enough introduction, but feel free to take it on and expand, please.
Thank you so much, Jesse. It's really great to be here with you all. The last time I was on a CTIPP call, I was talking about the parenting sentencing alternatives in Washington. So it's been quite a while. But I have been delighted the past couple of years to be working with Jesse and also with Whitney. I have moved to the University of Montana School of Public and Community Health Sciences. And so that's my official role now, and my contact information is here. Jesse's going to share this PowerPoint with you because there's like additional information you may want to have. So I just want to start by appreciating all of you for the work that you're doing, and by sharing what we're doing with this study. So it's it's a study about developmental adversity education, and we use this expression developmental adversity, which really comes to us from Bruce Perry, to mean all of those adversities, traumas, and significant stressors that are sufficient to alter the brain, the body, or the developmental trajectory. And we use it for a variety of reasons, including, as Perry says, some adverse childhood experiences don't rise to the level of clinical trauma, and that can create some confusion in certain settings. So we're really doing this study to understand how people are learning about developmental adversity. And what we really want to know is we want to hear from you. We want to hear from your colleagues that you've learned with. We want to hear from people that you have trained. We want to hear from people that your trainees have trained. And we want to hear from people that you've learned from, because there's a wide range of learning that happens out in the field. And the particular reason that we want to be studying right now is because developmental adversity education is getting more popular, it's getting more funding, it's becoming embedded in public policy. And there's an underlying theory of change, which is if people learn, then they and the places they work will change. And we're not really 100% sure that's true. And if it's true, we don't really know why. So we want to sort of get into those questions. And by looking at what works, it may help us to understand a lot more about best practices. So the study is mixed methods. It means it has two parts. There's a qualitative part, which is interviews. Whitney's been helping us a lot with those. We've been talking to we've talked to about 25 leaders or innovators in the field. We're going to go up to 35 folks. And that part of the study is focused on the learning journey. What I'm here to ask you about today is a web-based survey. And I'm a little bit nervous because this is it. This is the launch right here. I'm sure the technology really works and it'll all be fine, but I'm really nervous about it. So you're the first that I'm talking to. We are hoping for 1,000 respondents. It's a big number, but we want that big number because we're looking for variation in the learning experience, in people's professional experience, in their personal backgrounds, and in the ways that they've gone about applying or using their new knowledge out in the world. So we need a lot of variation. The survey is focused on two things. One is the content and the teaching methods that they've been exposed to, and the other is how they've gone about transferring or applying that learning in their world. So it has two parts. It's a little long. It does take about 30 minutes to complete, but it's a first of its kind study. And so there's a great deal of potential here. There's no real foundational literature to build on. And so we're really trying to cover a lot of ground, and we really would appreciate your help with that. So there are three ways that you can help. The first is to take the survey. You can see the link here, and Jesse is going to send this PowerPoint out. The link is also in the chat, so you can just link and go. I would encourage you to use your computer or your tablet. You can take it on the phone, but there are a couple of questions where screen readers don't really work on phones for those types of questions. So you're going to be better off on your computer or your tablet, but you're welcome to, muddle through on the phone too, if you like. We would like you to sign up for the follow-up study. There is a follow-up questionnaire, which will be very much shorter. And that is volunteering for that is the last question in the survey. And we also want you to share the link. And again, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from the colleagues you've learned with. We want to hear from the people you've trained, the people your trainees have trained, as well as the people you've learned from. So you can share widely. There's a little bit of caveat here. As I said, it does take a full 30 minutes to complete and is better done on a laptop or tablet. Respondents must be over 18 and live in the US. Research ethics require that I share with you particular recruitment language. And so in the following slides, it's there. I'm not really going to go over it in detail. And the reason for that language is because we always want participation in any study to be fully voluntary. And it's really easy to make things a little bit coercive. So for example, somebody who actually provides DA training might say to their employees, hey, everybody needs to take this survey because it'll be good for the company, right? That's actually, in the world of research ethics, considered to be a little bit coercive. So we're required to provide you language, and I hope that you will consider that as you invite others. Yeah, so just make sure that you're promoting in a way that's fully voluntary. So there's language here for email. There's language here for listserv or Facebook groups. There's language for blogs and newsletters, and there's language for social media. Oh, I want to stop sharing. That's what I want to do. So I'm happy to, I know that went super fast.
Krista, well, first of all, thank you. If you're able to put your email in the chat, again. I know that it's on the slideshow itself.
Yeah.
But just where folks can reach out. That would be great. Like Krista said, this is a first of its kind study. We're really excited about it and excited to be the first to help, spread the good word. Please continue to share it through your networks. Hopefully we can get that N much higher than 1,000. And again, that slideshow with the language that Krista shared is in the chat as well. Krista, we are moving on to our final speaker of the call, but before I did, because I interrupted you so rudely, are there any final thoughts or things that you wanted to share with the network?
No, I just really appreciate you giving me the chance to be here and to share this with you. I'm really excited about it and I'm very nervous about it. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer.
Us too. Thanks, Krista. We're really excited as well. Thanks for all that you're doing with this. The last presenter of the day, we're just rolling along with the CTIPP CAN call. What a great call. Is Steve Brown from the Traumatic Stress Institute of Klingberg Family Centers. And he'll talk to us about the implementation of trauma-informed care in organizations and systems serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. TSI launched a pilot 18-month learning collaborative supporting 4 IDD organizations to embed trauma-informed care in their organizational cultures. As you listen, like we do with all of our presentations, if you have questions as Steve is presenting, feel free to put them in the chat. And with the time that we have at the end, I'll run through a queue for questions and answers, just to try and organize because we are a bit tight on time. But Steve, with all of that, thank you for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jesse. Delightful to be with all of you today. To talk with you a little bit about our work in the developmental disability sector. So let me share my screen here. All right, assume you can see that, Jesse.
It looks great.
Great. So I am the director of a place called the Traumatic Stress Institute of Klingberg Family Centers. We are a training, consulting, and research institute that's part of a larger family service agency. We don't do clinical work, but what we do is support organizations all over the US and Canada and increasingly internationally about how to implement trauma-informed care. So here's our mission statement that we work on a systems level. We don't do sort of short-term training, short-term consultation. Our niche is really that we only work with whole systems and do so via coaching, professional training, and research. We sort of have 2 parts of our services. One is our whole system change model that we use with organizations and systems, and we also do a lot in trauma-informed care research. We co-created a measure called the Attitudes Related to Trauma-Informed Care Scale, which is the most widely used kind of validated measure of trauma-informed care, and we've talked about it here. We currently support about 92 organizations across the US and Canada. We have tended to work more in the behavioral health and the juvenile justice sector and child welfare. And about 3 years ago, we were looking around at sectors that were getting less of this trauma-informed care work, and really felt like the intellectual and developmental disability sector was very little was kind of happening in that sector related to trauma-informed care, and felt quite behind other sectors. And we really made a strategic decision that we wanted to do more in that sector. So we sort of began to kind of learn about the sector and partner with people who were working in the IDD sector and pair our trauma-informed care expertise with their expertise about IDD, and have now kind of made some really exciting strides in trying to bring trauma-informed care to to the folks who serve folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So just a little bit about what we mean about intellectual and developmental disabilities. IDD is sort of the acronym that you used. It's really quite a wide web of various types of challenges and disabilities, as shown here. Also kind of different kinds of domains that people have challenges, both in language, cognition, motor skills, social emotional skills, adaptive functioning. And we are currently working with both kind of youth serving organizations and adult serving organizations who have a wide variety of programs, ranging from kind of residential care to kind of group homes to work programs to in-home programs. So all different kinds of settings that are working with developmental disabilities. So, if that's not rationale enough, other reasons why we see this as so critically important is certainly the legacy of trauma in institutions. This is actually the institution in Virginia where Carrie Buck lived, and she was the subject of a Supreme Court case in the 1920s, which actually found that sterilization of people with IDD was constitutional, and allowed it to continue. They reference this in the story, but this idea that so often signs of trauma, potentially signs of trauma that is currently happening in the lives of these folks, or indication of past trauma is often attributed to the disability and overlooked, and trauma is not thought of, or other possible reasons. And this is called diagnostic overshadowing. Another reality of the programs that support people with IDD is that the folks who spend oftentimes all day, 8 hours, 10 hours a day with folks, get very, very little training. Many of them don't have BAs, just have high school degrees. We know that from research that they themselves has very high rates of trauma. And so these are the folks that are key to the kind of milieu and culture that is happening in programs, and we provide so little of it to them. And in fact, in the IDD sector, many of the people that are even receiving training at all are usually kind of higher level staff, administrators or clinical people or occupational therapists. Very little of the training is happening kind of on the level of the direct service professionals who work all the time. There's certainly a lot of forced compliance that happens and punishment that happens, sort of the influence of strict behavioral models, which don't think much about the relationship, but think about sort of the technology of how you're changing behavior, which often terms kind of punishing and coercive. And again, here, we're talking so often in these programs about compliance of behavior, not understanding that this is often making folks more vulnerable to people who would hurt them, to do what other people say. And this is what they've been kind of socialized to in many of the settings where they live and work. So to begin to get a sense of what is it like to implement trauma-informed care in these IDD organizations, we decided to launch a pilot learning collaborative where we would recruit IDD organizations from across the US and do an 18-month system change intervention in those organizations. We're not aware of any other intervention similar to this with IDD organizations. So it was quite intensive, which I'll talk about in a second. It also happened during the pandemic, which made it especially complicated, in that these organizations were sometimes losing 50, 60, 70% of their staff during the pandemic when there was the Great Resignation. So really complicated in terms of tons of staff turnover. We did a kind of application process and chose 4 IDD organizations, and they all were implementing our whole system change model, which I'll show you in a second. And it was led by a faculty expert team using the learning collaborative methodology, which people may or may not know is really a way to get multiple organizations to be working together to do peer learning, to do collaboration, and also to kind of hold organizations accountable to each other for the change process. It's a methodology that's often used in many healthcare settings to implement innovative practice. So we use that kind of general model as the model for change. And we also did a formal research study on the initiative. So the faculty team was made up of myself and John Kiesler, who is really one of the only researchers doing work at this intersection of trauma-informed care and IDD, and particularly on systems. Some people may have heard of Dr. Karen Harvey. She's really one of the people going around the country and speaking about the importance of trauma and attending to trauma and trauma-informed care. So we kind of assembled this faculty team to do kind of the presenting and the research and consultation and coaching. And they all, those 4 organizations went through our whole system change model, which kind of begins with sort of leadership engagement and commitment. Each organization forms a trauma-informed task force to foster and implement within their organization. We then have an initial staff training, which is uses Risk and Connection, which is a foundational trauma training that we've particularly adapted to IDD organizations. Risk and Connection is a training that's really been around for 20 years and has been used widely. Tens of thousands of people have gone through it as a foundational trauma training. We then did a train the trainer, and each organization put together their own organizational implementation plan. And then with coaching help, they began to roll out the training and other kinds of changes throughout their organization. And again, there was a program evaluation research component through this as well. We also support the trainers that get trained as trainers so that they can get ongoing professional development to continue to stay updated about trauma and trauma-informed care. And the 4 participating organizations, one was in Colorado, one was in Indiana, one is in New York, and one is in Connecticut. And just quickly, sort of some of our learnings from this first pilot that we did was, first of all, was just really interesting to us that that these IDD organizations really saw this as a way to kind of elevate their game, and that there was so few other people talking about trauma within their geographies that they really felt like this was a way to kind of enhance their services, to attract people to their programs, and really felt like it was really groundbreaking for them in their organizational development. There was also just really apparent that the organizations needed to sort of have readiness factors in place in order to make this systemic change, that they had to certainly have leadership buy-in. They needed to have kind of the bandwidth within the organization to do an implementation like this. That leadership commitment was absolutely critical in these organizations. And, you know, one of the things that we learned is just how desperate they were to stem the tide of turnover. And, you know, part of our training curriculum as part of trauma-informed care is that we talk all the time about the importance of self-care, attention to compassion fatigue, how organizations can build into their cultures support for their employees so that they stay longer in their positions and not such incredible turnover. And that was really, really important to them. We also learned things about kind of how common language it develops and the importance of common language. So often in these programs, they talk about attention-seeking behavior or avoidance behavior. And instead of attention-seeking behavior, we began to have them use like connection-seeking behavior that was much less negative connotations and helped kind of staff to sort of come from a more compassionate place, that they kind of understand it, that some of the challenging behavior is really about wanting attention from staff, wanting to hold the attention of staff. And again, just sort of the receptivity to training, that people felt hungry for this content, that it made sense to them, that it filled a need, and really felt like that you know, this was a kind of showed potential as really growing and spreading in the IDD sector. Certainly there were barriers, there were funding barriers, there were bandwidth barriers. The turnover makes this kind of change process incredibly challenging. There don't tend to be a lot of clinically oriented people in IDD organizations. They will often sort of farm out the mental health work. And so sort of that clinical thinking was also kind of a challenge that wasn't happening. So these are sort of some of the kind of barriers that we ran into as well. And, you know, what we're seeing in terms of IDD and trauma, I would say that we are seeing some growth and some of awareness, but I would say it's still really quite slow. We have had a couple other agencies interested in our work. We're doing another learning collaborative for 3 ARC organizations in Connecticut. There's some growth of resources for IDD and folks who have IDD and trauma, although they're almost always for individuals rather than focusing on systems. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network has made 3, I think, grantees in the last 5 years to youth organizations with serving youth with kids and youth with IDD. Certainly, it's a growing topic in IDD conferences. A lot of conference presentations at the NAD conference in recent years. Very interesting kind of soul-searching process is happening in the whole world of applied behavior analysis, which is a kind of field that is quite influential because they often are working with folks who have severe behavioral challenges. But this reckoning is really an examination of whether many of their traditional practices were in fact trauma-inducing and actually didn't bring about effective outcomes. And they themselves are beginning to kind of think about their work through a trauma-informed lens and rethink their work. And then sort of selected kind of statewide efforts through state governments. Ohio certainly is ahead of the game. I've heard some things about really important changes in Minnesota. We're in actual dialogue with the state about doing this same change process with their entire IDD sector, 1,100 employees. So there are kind of signs of systems and organizations being able to kind of take this on. So I will stop there and give us about 10 minutes to entertain questions or discussions or comments. So Jesse, I'll turn it over to you to see if you have If there are any questions that have come in through the chat that people would like to talk about?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Haven't seen any questions through the chat. Just want to, again, acknowledge that there was some pretty heavy content there. And so quickly, and then Wally, I see your hand up. But just want to share, again, I know that I share my Scissor Winks brain break quite frequently to the CTIPP CAN network. One of my other favorite brain breaks, if you want to do it, is what I call wave breath, which if you imagine the peaks and troughs of a wave, you breathe along those and it sort of slows it down. So think about a slow inhale and a slow exhale that's almost trying to mirror each other. And that's something that I'm able to do during a call in a meeting. And so it's just, and you almost speed it up on the exhale down, speed it up on the inhale up, and slow it down. So just wanted to say that because I recognize that there was some heavy content. Wally, I see your hand, and then Susan, I saw your question, or that you have a comment question. So Wally, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Jesse, and thanks, Steve, for your presentation. That's I'm impressed with your national scope and international access. One of the things that we struggle with in Strong Brain Institute is in T4T trainings. You know, you train somebody in an organization or agency, and then they do all the trainings from there on out. And one of the things I worry from a scientific perspective is the fidelity of the training at that point, because people have very bizarre concepts of what should be in this training. And sometimes the training that people deliver doesn't resemble much of the training that they got. And so I guess I have a question of, do you monitor the fidelity of the training after you do a T4T within an agency? How do you manage that?
It's a really, really good question. We do some forms of kind of fidelity management, although not as much as I think we wish we could. If we were to do more, it would be incredibly expensive and would kind of price people kind of out of being able to do it. But we have, first of all, very, very clear training materials where it's very apparent sort of what people are supposed to talk about for each slide. We have a training manual that's very specific. The other thing that we do is that we credential trainers. For all of our 92 agencies, we have close to 450 credentialed trainings, and they need to do continuing ed with us. They have to attend two webinars a year with us. They also have a recertification every 2 years that they have to do with us in order to kind of maintain their credential. We don't do, for example, some organizations may have people send in audio tapes, of their training. We don't have the bandwidth to kind of do that, but we try to manage fidelity in those other ways. But I think you're raising a good point.
Yeah, it's a great question, Wally. Thanks for that answer, Steve. Susan? Susan, you're on mute.
You're still muted, Susan.
Here, I'll ask to unmute.
Okay, there we go.
You go.
I'm high in the Sonoran Desert, and I think anyway, I just want to say thank you, Steve, for this. As a former group home manager for developmental disabilities in the 80s, we did have clients who were victims of sexual assault. And we were trained in the forms of applied behavior analysis and operant conditioning in order to help with toileting skills, dressing skills. So there's that fine line that comes into my head. Yes, clients can be more vulnerable to sexual assault if they have had this repetitive operant conditioning, applied behavior analysis, functioning training programs in their lives. So in your training, do you differentiate the benefits of operant conditioning for skill acquisition? And how do you teach personal safety to, say, nonverbal clients? Do you use puppets And do you differentiate it in a way that's developmentally appropriate for children and adults who lack expressive language? Do you use puppets? Do you use music? Do you use art therapy? What forms of media do you use?
Good question. Our program, because it's really focused on kind of broad culture change, that we are really doing just foundational trauma training with staff, sort of how to understand the importance of relationships, how to understand kind of how trauma can manifest itself in behavior, how to understand the kind of how behavior is often a survival technique. We talk a lot about compassion fatigue. We don't have time in the training to go into those kind of specifics. What we will do is sort of is refer programs to what we see as kind of responsible behavior, applied behavior analysis that is doing this in a somewhat trauma-informed way. But our intervention specifically doesn't get into that level of training, kind of specifically about how to intervene in a particular kind of problem. So that's sort of a finer detail than we get into, but I agree with you, that's really important stuff. And it is, I think what you're talking about, those fine distinction and those nuances are important on a micro level in programs.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you refer out.
Yes.
Thank you again. I haven't seen any more questions, and we're just a few minutes away from the 3:30 Eastern mark. So Steve, thank you for the presentation. Also, Krista, thank you for your presentation and the work on the study. Please do take the study and share it with your networks. The PowerPoint's still in the chat, and the link to the study is in the chat. Would be great to get that in as high as possible, as quickly as possible. And Minnie and Jen, thank you for your conversation at the start of the call. We look forward to continuing to strengthen, and support all of the advocacy around the country. And so, Minnie, it was wonderful to hear the ways that CTIPP's been able to support, but also the ways that you have been able to be such a change maker in Clallam County. And so thank you for that. Thank you to everyone who's stuck around with us. Again, March, CTIPP CAN and beyond, we are really, really looking forward to engaging in the collective wisdom of our network and group conversations. And so please feel free to share CTIPP CAN information with your networks. We want to continue to grow and expand our network to increase connections and continue to make great change in the country and the world around us. But for now, wishing you all a wonderful rest of the day and week. Be well, and we look forward to seeing you in a month, if not sooner. So thank you so much. Be well.
Thanks, everyone.